The bayou had been quiet for weeks after the storm, as if the wind had stolen the voices of every cicada and frog. Houses leaned sideways in the mud, their porches sagging, shingles peeled back like dead skin. The air still carried the taste of brackish water, a metallic tang that clung to your tongue long after you swallowed. Etta Roach knew better than to wander out after sundown, but lately she felt the pull, the low, thrumming call that seemed to ripple beneath her skin whenever the sky went purple. She told herself it was just the grief or the boredom or the way the nights felt too big now, the darkness stretching past the reach of the street lamps. Then she found the first bloom. It grew from a crack in the levee wall, its petals the color of old bruises. The stem pulsed faintly, like it had a heartbeat. She touched it without thinking, and the petal tips curled inward, brushing her fingertips with something warm and slick. The smell hit her next, sweet at first, like magnolia, then sour, like meat left too long in the heat. She told no one, but the flowers spread. 2 days later, they sprouted in the yard where her neighbor's trailer had been torn apart by the surge. The blossoms swayed in a wind she couldn't feel, and when she leaned close, she swore she could hear them whispering. Not words exactly, just sound that made her jaw ache and her stomach clench, as though her body was trying to remember a language it had never learned. That's when she noticed the changes in herself. The way her veins near her wrist glowed faintly under moonlight. The way her dreams smelled of wet earth and tasted of salt. The way her reflection lingered in mirrors a fraction longer than she stood there. Rumors were already curling through the parish. They said something had come in with the floodwaters. Something old. Something that could root itself in you if you got too close. Etta didn't believe the gossip. Not really. But when she woke one morning with a purple petal pressed between her teeth, she knew the blooms were inside her now, and whatever they wanted wasn't going to wait for her permission. By the third week, the parish smelled wrong. Not the usual rot of cypress knees and alligator nests. This was heavier, denser, like the air itself had spoiled. The blooms were everywhere now, clustering around porch posts, threading through chain-link fences, forcing their way up through cracked sidewalks. The strange part was how no one seemed to talk about them out loud. Folks would step over them, pretend not to notice the way the petals shivered even when the air was still. Sometimes Etta caught someone staring at her a second too long, their eyes darting to her throat like they were looking for something moving under her skin. It didn't help that she'd stopped feeling entirely human. One night, she stood in front of the bathroom mirror, pulling her collar wide. A faint lattice of purple veins fanned across her collarbone, delicate as frost. When she pressed a fingertip to one, the skin yielded, soft, almost petal-like, and a drop of dark sap welled up. It smelled faintly of salt and blood. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A message from Maribel. "Meet me by the docks tonight. It's important." Etta's stomach flipped. Maribel had been avoiding her since the storm, since the night they'd kissed under the water tower with rain still dripping from their hair. She went anyway. The docks were empty except for the hum of the sodium lamps and the slosh of black water below. Maribel was waiting, hood up, eyes wide and jittery. Etta could see the faint shimmer of something under her jaw. Not veins exactly, more like a soft ridge pushing up against the skin. "They're inside me, too," Maribel whispered. I think they're choosing us." The wind shifted, carrying a smell that was sweet and rotting all at once. Etta glanced down at the water and froze. The reflection staring back was not hers. The eyes were ringed in bruise-colored petals, the mouth half open and breathing like it was alive. Somewhere in the dark water below, something pulsed an answer. The ripples in the water spread in perfect circles, as if something just beneath the surface had exhaled. Etta took a step back from the edge, but the reflection stayed where it was, watching her with a patience that made her skin crawl. Maribel grabbed her wrist. "Don't look too long," she hissed. "That's how they get in deeper." Etta wanted to ask who they were, but the answer was already blooming in her mind like a memory she'd never lived. The shapes in the water, the way their faces bent and unfolded like petals opening in slow motion. And behind it all, that low thrumming, the same sound that had first pulled her outside after the storm. "Come on," Maribel urged, tugging her toward the shore path. "You need to see something." They walked in silence through the mangroves until the trees opened into a clearing. Dozens of people stood there, their faces pale in the moonlight. Some Etta recognized from the grocery store, from school, from church. But their eyes, every one of them had that faint violet ring now. In the center of the crowd grew a single towering bloom. Its stem was thicker than a tree trunk, its petals unfurling in slow, luxurious waves. The air was thick with its scent, sweet enough to make Etta's knees weaken. Sap dripped down its stem, pooling black and iridescent in the grass. "They call it the mother," Maribel murmured. After the flood, she woke up. As Etta stared, she realized the petals were not petals at all. They were layers of skin, thin and translucent, veined like leaves. Faces pressed faintly against the surface, some slack with sleep, others smiling faintly, their mouths moving in silent whispers. Etta's own veins began to throb in time with the pulse of the flower. Her fingertips tingled. Maribel turned to her, and in the moonlight Etta saw small buds breaking the surface of her skin along her neck. "It doesn't hurt," Maribel said softly. "Not once you stop fighting it." The mother scent pressed in, thick as honey, and somewhere deep in Etta's chest, something began to answer. The ground beneath the mother wasn't dirt anymore. It was soft, almost spongy and warm, as if the whole clearing were inside of some living thing. Each step Etta took sank her deeper, the faint give underfoot reminding her too much of muscle and fat. The crowd swayed in unison, their chests rising and falling like they were breathing the same lungful of air. Somewhere in the distance, an egret cried, but the sound warped, drawn out into something almost human before it faded. Etta's mouth was dry. She tried to swallow, but the back of her throat felt strange, rougher, as though something small and fibrous was growing there. "Don't be afraid," Maribel said, and her voice wasn't entirely hers anymore. It had a second tone to it, a low vibration that seemed to come from the ground itself. From the base of the mother, long tendrils began to uncoil. They moved with impossible slowness, tasting the air, brushing over the crowd. Each time one passed close, the person it touched tilted their head back, lips parting in some silent invitation. Etta couldn't move. Her veins were glowing brighter now, the light pulsing faster in rhythm with the flower. Every beat sent a warm rush through her limbs, and with it, flashes of things she'd never seen. Drowned fields under a blood-orange sky, roots twisting around a ribcage, hands sinking into black water and finding themselves held. One tendril brushed the back of her hand. Where it touched, her skin softened, then split open without pain. From the slit, a tiny petal unfurled, trembling in the humid air. The crowd sighed as one. Maribel stepped closer, her own buds now opening into slick, violet blossoms. "She's claiming you," she whispered, "and once she does, you'll see what's coming." The tendril curled gently around Etta's wrist, the warm spread of her arm, slow and certain, rooting deep. From somewhere deep within the mother, something began to knock. The knocking grew louder, not the sound of wood or stone, but something dense and wet, like fists striking inside a coffin made of flesh. Each thud vibrated through the clearing, rattling the air in Etta's lungs until she wasn't sure if she was breathing for herself anymore. The mother's petals shifted, parting slightly to reveal a dark seam at its center. From within came a humid gust of air, rich with the smell of brine and decay. The crowd shuddered like the scent was a blessing. Maribel took Etta's other hand, her fingers cool but trembling. "When she opens, don't look away," she said. The buds along her neck had blossomed fully now, glistening with droplets of amber sap. It ran down her collarbone in lazy rivulets, sinking into the strange, soft earth beneath their feet. The tendril on Etta's wrist tightened, not painfully, but with a grip that told her escape wasn't an option. Her pulse was no longer her own. Each beat belonged to the mother. Her vision blurred at the edges, colors bending into a bruised spectrum. Inside her skull, something whispered. It wasn't words at first, just a slow pattern, the sound of roots moving through wet soil. But then it shaped itself into language. "You are not one. You were never one." Her knees gave way, and the earth caught her softly, as if it had been waiting. The knocking became a steady rhythm now, a heartbeat so vast it seemed to fill the entire parish. With each pulse, she felt parts of herself loosening, the shape of her hands, the length of her breath, the boundaries of her skin. Around her, the crowd began to hum. Not a tune, not even human voices anymore, but the vibration of something deep and ancient carried in their chests. The sound made the blooms tremble, scattering faint motes of golden dust into the air. Etta inhaled without thinking, and the dust tasted like rainwater and blood. Maribel leaned close, her breath warm against Etta's ear. "She's been waiting for someone to carry her further," she murmured. "Maybe it's you." The seam in the mother's center yawned wider. Something inside shifted, slow, deliberate, and alive. The opening in the mother's center glistened, edges wet and flexing, as though the flower itself was breathing. From a seam, a pale, root-like limb slid outward, smooth at first, then splitting into fronds tipped with delicate, finger-shaped ends. Each tip quivered, tasting the air. The crowd swayed harder, their hum vibrating through the soft ground. Etta could feel it in her teeth, in the hollow space just behind her eyes. Her own hum rose without her meaning it to, matching their pitch exactly, her throat vibrating until it ached. The fronds reached for her, not in a lunge, but in a slow, almost tender approach, curling around her shoulders and brushing her jaw. The touch left streaks of warmth that sank into her skin like sunlight through dark water. Her vision shifted. The clearing was still there, but layered over with something older, a drowned forest glowing faintly from within, trees bending toward a black sky. Shapes moved through the water, long and sinuous, their forms braided with vines and bones. Every one of them turned toward her at once. Maribel's hand found hers again, squeezing tight. Her blossoms brushed against Etta's arm, releasing a thin mist that clung to her skin in glittering droplets. "Don't fight it," she whispered. "It's not just her inside there. It's all of them." The fronds curled closer, and Etta felt the faintest pressure at her temples. It wasn't pain, more like the way soil parts when a root begins to grow. Something was winding its way inward, careful and deliberate, tracing the paths of her nerves. Her breath came shallow, and with each inhale, the mother's scent grew stronger, until it was the only thing in her head. Sweet, rotting, familiar. The knocking had stopped. In its place was silence, but it wasn't empty. It was waiting. From deep inside the mother, a voice bloomed, not in her ears, but inside her own thoughts, opening like a flower. "We have been here longer than your blood remembers." The fronds tightened gently, and the vision of the drowned forest pulsed brighter. Something beneath the water began to rise. The water in her vision bulged, as if something vast was pressing upward from beneath. The surface quivered, then split soundlessly, spilling a thick, black liquid that spread to the drowned forest like ink in clear water. The mother's fronds held Etta steady. She couldn't look away even if she'd wanted to. The vision was inside her now, stitched into her heartbeat. From the darkness below, a shape began to surface. At first it looked like a mass of tangled roots, but then it shifted, folding and unfolding into forms her mind kept trying to name. A shoulder, a jaw, something like a rib cage, but carved from pale, fibrous tissue threaded with veins that glowed faintly violet. Maribel's hum deepened beside her, and Etta felt the vibration pass through their joined hands. Her skin was hot now, her veins so bright she could see the light through the edges of her fingers. The shape in the water rose higher. Its head, if it was a head, turned toward her. From its surface sprouted blooms identical to the ones in the parish, their petals opening and closing in slow rhythm. Inside some of them, she saw the faint outlines of faces. The mother's voice filled her again. What was washed away must be replanted. One of the fronds slid from her shoulder to her chest, pressing gently over her sternum. Beneath it, her heart faltered, not from fear, but because something else was beating with it now, a second rhythm weaving into her own. The air in the clearing thickened. Motes of golden dust swirled around the crowd, settling into their hair, their mouths, their eyes. The hum became a single, low note that seemed to come from the ground itself. Etta's knees buckled, but the fronds caught her before she fell. They lifted her slightly, as though offering her forward to the thing rising in the vision. Maribel's blossoms brushed her cheek, their scent dizzying. "It's almost time," she said, her voice carrying both her own tone and the mother's deeper resonance. In the vision, the water lapped higher, and the figure beneath finally broke the surface. Its eyes, if there were eyes, opened, and the clearing moved. The movement was subtle at first, a slow tilt under her feet, as if the clearing were a raft on unseen water. Then the ground itself began to pulse, each rise and fall matching the doubled heartbeat in her chest. The vision no longer felt separate. The drowned forest black water seeped into the air around her, curling between the trees at the edge of the clearing, swallowing the moonlight. The smell of brine and rot grew so thick she could taste it with every breath. The crowd didn't seem to notice the change. They swayed harder, their hum deepening, their blossoms releasing heavier clouds of golden dust. It drifted toward the mother's open seam, sucked inward with each slow inhale the flowers seemed to take. Etta's fingers twitched. She looked down and saw fine tendrils, impossibly thin, like spun glass, pushing out from her skin along the back of her hand. They trembled in the air, reaching toward the mother as if they had a will of their own. The fronds holding her shifted, drawing her closer to the wet, dark opening at the flower's center. The air there was warmer, damp enough that moisture beaded along her cheek. Inside, something shifted again, a mass of pale roots curling and uncurling, their tips tipped in violet light. "You will carry us beyond the water," the voice whispered in her thoughts. "You will bloom where the ground forgets us." Maribel's grip on her hand tightened, almost pain. Etta turned to her, and for a moment, she couldn't tell where Maribel's face ended and the blossoms began. The petals along her jawline pulsed faintly, breathing in sync with the mother. Around them, the trees at the edge of the clearing leaned inward. Their bark split open, and from the wounds, new blooms emerged, smaller, darker, their petals slick and trembling. The air filled with the sound of roots tearing through soil, or with groaning under unseen pressure. In the vision's black water, the risen figure moved closer. Every ripple it made pushed the clearing a fraction deeper into the drowned forest, until Etta could no longer tell if her feet were standing on earth or floating on the water's surface. Somewhere in the dark, something began to sing. The song was low at first, almost beneath hearing, more vibration than sound. It seemed to come from every direction, from the crowd's throats, from the trembling petals, from deep in the water. Etta felt it in her bones. Each note threaded through her, not passing over her ears but inside her, like it had been waiting in her blood all along. Her thoughts slowed, rearranging themselves in patterns that didn't feel entirely hers. Maribel's blossoms quivered with each rise in the melody. When she exhaled, her breath carried the same note, as if she were no longer speaking for herself. "It's easier if you let it in," she murmured. "It stops hurting when you stop being just you." The golden dust swirled thicker, clinging to eyelashes, pooling in the hollows of throats. The crowd swaying was perfectly synchronized now, their movements as precise as the tides. Etta's legs buckled again, but the mother's fronds held her upright, drawing her closer to the seam. Inside, the pale root mass shifted with the rhythm of song, each pulse releasing a slow exhale of humid breath. In the merged vision, the black water figure moved nearer. Now she could see that its blooms weren't just flowers. Each one held a curled body within, suspended in a viscous fluid. Some were human, some were not. The song rose a fraction, and pain bloomed suddenly behind her eyes, sharp, splitting, before dissolving into a dizzy warmth. Images flooded her. Fields under a sky the color of bruises, hands planting seeds in graves, a river that ran backward into the sea. Her own mouth open, without her meaning it to. The note that came out wasn't her voice. The figure in the water lifted one root-like arm toward her, the gesture slow, inevitable. The clearing lurched forward, the ground tilting toward the black surface as if gravity had shifted. Somewhere behind her, she heard the first splash, and then another. The splashes were deliberate, heavy, not the flailing of someone drowning, but the slow entry of bodies surrendering to the pull. Etta turned her head just enough to see them. Neighbors, classmates, faces she'd known her whole life, stepping into the water as if drawn by an invisible tether. Each footfall sent ripples shivering across the clearing, erasing the line between shore and surface. The song deepened, and with it, the air grew thicker. Breathing felt like drinking something warm and heavy. The golden dust hung motionless now, suspended as if time itself had stalled. Maribel's hand slipped from hers, only for a moment, but when Etta looked again, Maribel was already ankle-deep in the black water. Petals along her neck opened wider, catching the faint violet glow rising from beneath the surface. Her eyes found Etta's, and the faintest smile curved her lips. "You'll follow," she said, though her mouth didn't move in time with the words. The mother's frond shifted, lowering Etta toward the water's edge. The ground beneath her feet no longer felt like soil. It flexed slightly under her weight, as if she were standing on the skin of something alive. In the vision layered over the clearing, the massive figure in the water stood fully revealed. Its body was a lattice of roots and bone, threaded with veins of light, every inch of it in bloom. The faces in its petals watched her, some blinking slowly, others mouthing words she couldn't hear. "Step," the voice in her head urged. It was no longer just a mother. It was a crowd, the figure, the forest, the water. A single voice wearing 1,000 mouths. "Step, and you will not return alone." The first lick of the black water touched her toes. It was warmer than she expected. The heat crept up through her bones, meeting the glow already pulsing in her veins. Behind her, the clearing groaned, a deep organic sound, as more trees split open, spilling sap and petals into the tide. In front of her, the figure extended its arm again. Closer now, close enough that the bloom at its tip began to open. Something inside shifted, and it was moving toward her. The bloom at the figure's fingertip unfurled with aching slowness. Inside, cradled in its slick petals, was a shape she recognized, her own face, eyes closed, mouth faintly parted as if in sleep. Etta's breath caught. The song swelled to fill her skull until there was no room for fear. Behind her, the crowd's humming became one continuous note, a tide that pushed her forward. The black water rose to her knees, warm as blood, seeping into every seam of her skin. Maribel was waist-deep now, blossoms along her neck trembling in rhythm with the mother's breath. She reached out, and Etta took her hand. The moment their fingers met, the vision and the clearing became the same place. The drowned forest breathing around them, the great figure bending low. The bloom with her mirrored face touched her forehead. A pulse surged through her, swift and final. Her boundaries dissolved. No edges, no singular self, just root, sap, and song. She felt herself blooming in 100 places at once. In the soil beneath the parish, in the cracks of the levee, in the mouths of strangers who would carry her elsewhere. The last of her breath left her lungs, and the mother's inhale took it in. When the petals closed again, there was no one left standing on the shore.